Jasmine Crockett dropped one sentence in a congressional hearing that exposed Melania Trump's secret prenup, and the entire White House hasn't recovered since. There wasn't a single empty seat in the Rayburn House office building that morning. The air was tight, too many bodies packed into too small a room. Yet, all eyes stayed fixed on the panel of representatives locked in another bitter debate. The hearing had been billed as a routine discussion on small business tax reform, but nothing about it felt routine. The country was tense. The president was under fire. Then, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. She was calm, that kind of calm that made people nervous. Dressed in a fitted charcoal suit with her hair pulled back tight, she sat quietly at first, waiting for her turn. But by the third time a Republican colleague interrupted her mid-question, her smile thinned. "Are you finished?" she asked, without raising her voice, eyes narrowed. The room hushed. There was something about the way she said it, the kind of stillness that creeps in before something breaks. The committee chair cleared his throat, tried to move things along, but Crockett held the mic. "Since I'm apparently only allowed to speak in fragments," she said, "I'll use this moment wisely." She pulled out a slim stack of papers from her folder, documents she'd hinted at earlier in the week but never fully disclosed. There had been rumors, but most chalked it up to political bluffing. Then she said it. "Let the record reflect," Crockett began, steady as a surgeon, "that these documents, certified and time-stamped by the Southern District of Florida, show that the First Lady, Melania Trump, amended her prenuptial agreement less than 4 months before President Trump launched his current campaign." It landed like a dropped hammer. Gasps, audible ones. One Republican muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Others looked like they were trying to process what she had just said. Crockett didn't flinch. She continued, "And according to 2 separate insider accounts, this amendment was directly tied to a contingency clause, one that activates in the event of a public scandal or criminal indictment." That's when the room broke. Chaos. Several people began speaking over each other. Some demanded the statement be stricken from the record. One aide rushed from the back of the chamber with a phone in hand. Cameras were still rolling. This wasn't just another hearing anymore, this was live television. Someone tried to interrupt her again. Crockett held up her hand. "I will not be silenced," she said. "Not when this administration expects women to sit down, smile, and stay quiet. Not when truth gets buried under ego." Outside the building, within minutes, the hashtag Melania clause began trending. A clip of her words had already been posted to X and was gaining traction fast. Not just political accounts, but lifestyle bloggers, law students, former staffers. Everyone had an opinion. Inside, the chair slammed his gavel over and over, trying to regain control. Order. Order. But the room was gone. Crockett calmly gathered her papers and leaned back in her seat. She wasn't smiling, but she didn't look angry either. She looked like someone who knew exactly what she had just done. At that very moment, down the street inside the West Wing, Donald Trump's inner circle had already started getting flooded with calls and alerts. One aide recalled later that the president's phone lit up so fast his screen didn't go dark for an hour. What was supposed to be a forgettable hearing had just triggered the political version of a 5-alarm fire. But this wasn't the explosion. This was just the fuse. The clip hit national news faster than a fire jumps dry brush. Within an hour, every major outlet, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, even local affiliates from places like Des Moines and Tulsa, ran the footage of Representative Jasmine Crockett calling out the First Lady's revised prenup live during a congressional hearing. They replayed it over and over, her tone calm, her words sharp, the room frozen in disbelief. At 12:17 p.m., Trump's team issued an internal code red. That's not speculation. Multiple staffers confirmed later they were told to contain Crockett and get ahead of the narrative. But they were already behind, way behind. #Melania clause hit 1 million tweets in just under 3 hours. People weren't just reacting, they were dissecting. TikTokers broke down the legal terminology Crockett used, posting videos explaining how prenup clauses like that work. Instagram pages with no political alignment started quoting her speech like scripture. Memes exploded. But in the West Wing, it wasn't funny. Trump was eating lunch in the private dining room next to the Oval Office when his chief of staff came in with a tablet, visibly shaken. "You need to see this," he said. The moment Trump watched the footage, something snapped. He slammed the table hard enough that the Secret Service stationed outside took notice. 2 aides were told to leave the room immediately. Another staffer, who asked to remain anonymous, said the president's voice rose so loud you could hear him cursing down the hall. "She wants to drag Melania into this," he yelled. "She thinks she's untouchable." Phones rang non-stop. The press office was cornered with questions they hadn't prepared for. Reporters weren't asking about policy. They were asking why the First Lady's legal team had quietly renegotiated her prenup and what that said about her confidence in the president's future. That was the question that stung the most. Did Melania think something was coming? Back inside the Capitol, Crockett had already left the hearing room. She was headed down the back hallway with 2 aides when a young staffer caught up to her. "You okay?" he asked, breathless. She didn't slow down. Never better. But she knew what she had done, and she also knew what was coming. Cable pundits pounced. Some said she was reckless. Others called it the most transparent moment in Congress all year. One conservative host on a late afternoon panel looked into the camera and asked, "Who the hell is feeding her that kind of material?" But she didn't flinch. Hours later, Crockett posted a short clip from the hearing to her own account with only 4 words, "Truth doesn't need permission." It was a direct jab at every attempt to silence her in that hearing. The comments section was a mess. People cheering, people fuming, people demanding proof, but others were suddenly interested in who she was and what else she might say next. Back at the White House, things were unraveling fast. Melania wasn't in the building. In fact, she hadn't been seen in public since a photo op at a Miami Children's Hospital 5 days earlier. Now, reporters were camped outside her private residence in Maryland, looking for any sign she might come forward with a denial, but she didn't. No statement, no tweet, no smile and wave from the car window. The silence spoke louder than expected. By early evening, 3 sources within Trump's campaign said he was calling donors directly, trying to calm nerves. One described the calls as off-script and angry. Another said he kept looping back to the same question, how the hell did she get those documents? That's when people started digging. And not just journalists, former campaign workers, legal analysts, people from Trump's own party. They wanted to know who leaked it and why they did it now. But while the political world spun itself into chaos, Jasmine Crockett was back at her condo in D.C., sitting at her kitchen table with a glass of ginger tea and her phone face down. Her aide, Kia, leaned against the counter behind her. "You sure you want to be quiet right now? Everyone's begging you to go on CNN tonight." Crockett looked up. "Let it breathe," she said. "They're already drowning." But silence never lasts long in politics, not when people start wondering who's holding the match. That night, long after the press vans had cleared from outside the Capitol and most of Washington had settled into its familiar rhythm of scandal fatigue, the real work began behind closed doors. At 9:42 p.m., inside the residence section of the White House, 3 aides sat in a secured conference room just down the hall from the Lincoln bedroom. Their job wasn't policy, it was damage control. They weren't working on healthcare or tariffs. They were triaging a marriage. The folder on the center of the table was marked, "FLOTUS Confidential." One of them had retrieved it from an off-site legal archive earlier that afternoon under direct orders from senior counsel. Inside were timelines, court submissions, and communication logs from Melania Trump's legal team, and it confirmed what Crockett had claimed. The amendment was real. The dates did line up, and it was signed in Palm Beach County 4 months before Trump's campaign launch. One aide flipped through the papers, jaw clenched, muttering, "This isn't a coincidence." But they didn't dare say that out loud near the president. Trump was pacing the hallway, barking orders into a phone, trying to get someone, anyone, to find out who had leaked the files to Crockett. He wasn't focused on the content. He was focused on the betrayal. In his mind, someone inside his circle had turned against him. Someone had fed ammunition to a woman he already viewed as a political enemy. Down the hall, Melania's personal assistant had locked herself in the guest room. She'd already spoken to the First Lady twice by phone, once to inform her of the hearing and once to warn her about what the media was saying. Both calls had been short. "Tell them nothing," Melania had said. The next morning, that silence was still holding. The First Lady's absence was the headline across every cable network. Journalists were posting grainy photos from security cameras at Mar-a-Lago, trying to track her whereabouts. Meanwhile, inside the White House, Trump's fury hadn't cooled. He held a private breakfast meeting with a group of loyal lawmakers. No press, no cameras. The goal? Circle the wagons. One senator from Texas leaned in and said, "Mr. President, this is only going to escalate. You've got to shut it down before it grows legs." Trump banged the table. "She's trying to drag my wife into this mess. That's off limits." Another ally tried to calm him. "Then put Melania out there. Have her deny it. She hasn't said anything, and people are filling in the blanks." But Trump refused. He didn't want Melania giving interviews. He didn't want her anywhere near a microphone. What he wanted was Crockett cornered, discredited, and politically buried. A memo was drafted before lunch, a plan to accuse Crockett of spreading unverified conspiracy theories during a federal hearing. A few legal analysts on conservative networks had already started floating the same line, but back at Crockett's office, no one looked worried. In fact, her team was unusually calm. That morning, Kia handed her a plain manila envelope marked, "Do not copy." Inside was a letter postmarked from Naples, Florida, unsigned, but containing 3 pages of emails between a known Trump advisor and a Florida-based attorney representing Melania. The date on the email? Just 3 days before the prenup renegotiation was filed. Crockett read it once, then again. Kia watched her carefully. "It's solid. You want to go public?" Crockett shook her head. "Not yet. Let them keep sweating." But it wasn't just Trump's camp sweating now. Moderate Republicans, especially those up for re-election, started worrying about how this might affect suburban voters. The story wasn't about marriage anymore. It was about trust, manipulation, control. It was emotional. It was raw. By the end of the day, Trump's inner circle realized they'd made a miscalculation. By refusing to address it head-on, they'd let Crockett define the narrative. And once the public latches onto a story like this, it doesn't stay political. It turns personal. But personal stories have a way of digging into places politicians can't control. The questions spread faster than the clip itself. Where did she get them? It wasn't just the usual pundits asking. Capitol Hill staffers whispered about it in cafeteria lines. Legal analysts dropped half-baked theories on morning news shows. Even foreign media picked it up. Someone, somewhere, had handed Representative Jasmine Crockett certified legal documents tied to the First Lady of the United States, and they were real. And Crockett? She wasn't saying a word. Back in her D.C. office, the phones rang nonstop. Reporters, advocacy groups, even a documentary crew from San Francisco called, offering an exclusive sit-down. She ignored them all. Instead, she and Kia sat in a closed meeting with their legal advisor, Marcy Dillard, a no-nonsense 50-something with glasses always slipping down her nose. "You're covered," Marcy said, flipping through the envelope again. "The documents are a public record. Hard to argue with timestamps and clerk signatures." Crockett leaned back. "They're going to accuse me of planting this. Watch." Marcy shrugged. Let them. Truth don't need dressing up. But that didn't stop the hunt. Within 48 hours, Trump's legal team launched an internal review. They traced every document request tied to Melania's financial filings over the last year. They subpoenaed metadata. They called in favors from Florida court clerks. The pressure wasn't just political, it was personal. Now, that's when a name surfaced, not publicly, not yet, but in private GOP circles. Fingers began pointing towards someone familiar, Gideon Maris, a former campaign advisor who'd left quietly in early spring after clashing with Trump over policy messaging. Maris had kept a low profile since his exit, bouncing between consulting gigs and a guest lecturer position at a small college outside Cleveland. But he had one thing most others didn't: access, deep, direct access to sensitive campaign documentation. One former staffer remembered seeing him in Palm Beach just a week before the amended prenup was filed. Another swore they saw his name CC'd on emails between Trump's legal team and a West Palm notary. No proof, no confirmation, just whispers. Still, it didn't stop Crockett from getting a message, handwritten, with no return address, left under her office door 2 nights later. Gideon is clean, but you're not far off. Kia read it twice, then checked the hall to make sure no one had been seen near the door after hours. You believe this? She asked. Crockett held the note like it was warm. I think someone's scared, and people only get scared when you're close to something. Across the aisle, Republican leadership scrambled. A private Zoom call between senior campaign staff and several prominent donors was leaked to the Washington informant. In the call, one donor asked bluntly, if she has more, what else can she drop? And that was the real fear, because if Crockett could obtain this, what else might she be holding? By Friday, a conservative strategist went on national radio and speculated that this could be the start of a drip campaign. Not a bombshell, a leak-by-leak humiliation, the kind that peels away at reputation, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but questions and deflections. In response, Trump's camp launched a counteroffensive: legal filings, letters to media execs warning of defamation, demands to fact-check live broadcasts. A senior official even threatened to sue anyone hosting Crockett on air, but their panic only fueled more attention. In Dallas, a bookstore added Crockett's name to their "Women Who Spoke Truth" window display. In Phoenix, a muralist painted her likeness on a wall usually reserved for musicians and civil rights leaders. Even in parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania, key swing states, her name started showing up in polling questions for focus groups. All this, and still no public statement from Melania Trump. The silence grew heavier by the hour. By now, some insiders were convinced Crockett wasn't working alone. There had to be a source, possibly more than one, with a personal vendetta or political strategy, maybe both. And the biggest question remained: why now? Crockett's only public comment that week was during a podcast taping in Baltimore. When asked who handed her the documents, she smiled and replied, "The truth has a way of finding people who know how to use it." But the people she was up against? They were just getting started, and they were digging hard. By the end of the week, one thing became painfully clear. Even for those loyal to the Trump brand, Melania's silence was no longer strategic. It was suspicious. Normally, after a personal or political controversy, she'd make some kind of appearance, a charity visit, a school event, even just a carefully timed photo walking alongside her husband at Andrews. But this time, nothing. Not a word, not a frame. Day 6 of silence came and went. News outlets began keeping count like it was a public scoreboard. Fox's evening anchor tried to downplay it. "She's always been a private first lady," he said. "This isn't new." But it was, because for the first time, the story wasn't about Melania Trump being distant. It was about her possibly preparing to distance herself for good. TMZ ran a headline that morning: "Is Melania already gone?" It wasn't completely baseless. A former stylist posted cryptic comments online about, "The last time I saw her in D.C." Another insider, This one from Mar-a-Lago, told a Miami reporter that Melania had been unusually guarded in recent weeks, skipping meetings with longtime friends and dodging questions about the upcoming campaign. Meanwhile, a video from last year resurfaced on social media. It showed Melania hesitating when a reporter asked if she was looking forward to campaigning again. Her response was short, "We'll see what happens." But now, under a different lens, it hit harder. In the court documents, the legal language Crockett quoted, people were picking them apart like gospel. Lines like, amended provision. D party may seek full asset reevaluation if public scandal directly compromises future income streams, and another, in the event of legal indictment, marital partnership is subject to financial reclassification. These weren't phrases you see in every prenup. This wasn't just about money. It was preparation, quiet, deliberate preparation. On Capitol Hill, a few Republican staffers privately admitted they were starting to worry. One aide from Iowa said, "If Melania knew something was coming and started planning a way out months ago, that's not a political problem. That's a trust fracture." And voters noticed. Crockett's office saw a spike in mail, physical letters, hundreds of them, many from women, retired nurses, former military spouses. One note simply read, "It takes guts to say what no one else will. Don't stop." Her team read them out loud during a break between briefings. Kia cried during one. Even Crockett paused longer than usual. "They think I'm doing this for attention," she said. "But some of these folks have been waiting decades to hear someone name what's right in front of us." At the same time, Trump's team pushed back hard. They fed stories to friendly outlets claiming Melania was simply focused on family or taking time to reflect on the campaign strategy. They even tried to schedule an appearance at a children's literacy event in Philadelphia, but it was quietly canceled the night before. Sources say Melania refused. It became clear to those closest to her that she was unwilling to be used as a prop in someone else's cleanup operation. And if that was true, it meant Trump had lost the one thing he'd always had from her, compliance. At a closed-door dinner with 3 top donors in Las Vegas, Trump finally broke. "They don't know what we've been through," he said, waving off a question about her absence. "They think they're going to paint her as a victim. She's fine. She's loyal." But he said it too fast, too forced. One of the donors, who later spoke off record to the Nevada Review, said it felt like watching a man trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett sat for a brief radio interview with a small station out of Birmingham. The host, an older woman with a soft voice, asked her one simple question: "What made you bring up the First Lady at that hearing?" Crockett paused. Because if the highest office in this country is built on silence and spin, then someone's got to ask what that silence is protecting. But that silence was cracking, and the more it held, the louder it sounded. By Monday morning, the headlines had turned. No longer was the focus just on Melania's absence. It was on Jasmine Crockett. She'd gone from principal disruptor to lightning rod. Conservative talk shows tore into her. Headlines screamed about congressional overreach and personal attacks on the First Lady. Several Republicans called for a formal censure. "She crossed the line," barked Congressman Lel Brent from Arkansas during a press conference outside the Capitol. "There are limits, even in politics." Crockett watched that clip from her office, arms folded, face unreadable. "They keep saying I crossed the line," she said to Kia. "But no one's asking why the line was there in the first place." The pushback wasn't just noise, it was coordinated. Anonymous sources tried linking her to foreign donors. A fringe outlet claimed she doctored the documents. Talk show hosts speculated about her motives, her funding, her family. And then came the threats. Her team received dozens of hate messages in less than 24 hours. One email read, "You're dead the next time you step outside the Capitol." Another called her a traitor puppet. The Capitol Police increased security around her office. Extra personnel were stationed near her residence. Still, Crockett didn't flinch. at least not publicly. The pressure mounted fast. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Neighbors complained. News trucks double-parked across the street. Her name was everywhere, her inbox overflowing. That night, she sat alone in her living room, phone off, TV muted, lights low. It was the first quiet she'd had in days. Kia showed up without knocking, holding a bag of takeout and a look of worry. "Jazz," she said gently, "you don't have to keep going. We can slow this down. Do one statement. Ease off." Crockett shook her head. "I don't get to ease off. That's the whole game. They push us until we sit back down." Kia lowered her voice. "I'm not talking politics. I'm talking safety." Silence. Then Crockett leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "They want me scared, but I'm not. I'm mad." The next day, she went on live TV. It wasn't the big Sunday shows, she turned them all down. Instead, she chose a Wednesday morning slot on Morning Ground, a mid-level current affairs program known for its longer interviews and loyal working-class audience. The host, Brian Schell, didn't waste time. "Congresswoman, you're in the center of a firestorm. People want to know, was your statement about Melania Trump personal or political?" Crockett didn't blink. "It was factual, and facts aren't disrespectful just because they make people uncomfortable." Schell nodded slowly. "Do you regret saying it in a public hearing?" "No," she said. "I regret that the truth had to come from me because everyone else was too scared to say it out loud." That line was clipped and posted across social media within minutes. And it hit hard, especially with younger voters and women in swing states. The authenticity rang louder than the backlash. She wasn't reading off a script. She wasn't calculating. She was tired, angry, and still standing. Across the country, support swelled. Small-town mayors posted words of solidarity. College students flooded her comment sections. Even a few moderate Republicans admitted off record that she'd changed the conversation. One voter in Erie, Pennsylvania, told a local station, she said what everyone else dances around. "You don't go rewriting your prenup unless you know something's coming." Meanwhile, Trump's team tried to hold the line. They released a short statement: "Melania Trump continues to support her husband and his mission to serve the American people." No video, no appearance, just 12 words. It landed flat. Inside GOP strategy meetings, tensions rose. Fundraisers reported growing donor fatigue. Suburban women, once a pillar of the Trump re-election effort, began polling lower than expected. Crockett's moment had turned into a movement. She didn't declare war. She just refused to sit quietly while everyone else pretended the emperor still had clothes. But in politics, momentum is a dangerous thing, because once it starts, no one controls where it ends. As Crockett's interview gained steam, the media machine cranked into overdrive. Suddenly, the coverage wasn't just about a congresswoman exposing a presidential marriage. It was about the story behind the marriage, the decades of carefully controlled appearances, the contradictions, the discomfort that had always been there, lingering in plain view. The networks didn't hold back. Cable producers raced to book any former aide, stylist, decorator, or bodyguard with a past connection to the Trumps. Everyone wanted a soundbite, and they got plenty. One former event planner from West Palm Beach, who worked 2 fundraisers at Mar-a-Lago in 2018, told the Sentinel, "Melania never made eye contact unless she had to. She was distant, not cold, just done." Another former White House social secretary added fuel to the fire: she negotiated every public appearance like a contract. Her team approved lighting, angles, and seating arrangements, always controlled. Even people close to the campaign started to crack. A GOP consultant in Arizona admitted on a podcast, "This isn't about a prenup anymore. This is about the image cracking, and voters are watching." Then came the real shift: long-form investigative pieces. The Atlantic Tribune ran a two-page spread tracing Melania's involvement in Trump's political life from 2015 to now, laying out a pattern of calculated distance and legal preparation. They quoted anonymous sources from both the legal and real estate world, people who hinted at secret trusts and quiet property transfers tied to her name. One excerpt read, "While the country saw hand-holding and stiff smiles, private attorneys worked overtime to protect assets and position. And people were eating it up." Meanwhile, Crockett's office held firm. No additional statements, no bombshell part 2, just silence. That silence did more than speaking ever could. In Philadelphia, a group of retired lawyers organized a teach-in on high-profile prenup clauses. In Sacramento, a local women's shelter used Crockett's clip to raise money, calling her a voice for those trapped behind powerful men's shadows. The narrative had expanded. It wasn't just about Trump. It was about the system. Back in D.C., Trump's camp knew they were losing control. The president started holding longer press availabilities, rambling, defensive, focused less on policy and more on protecting the image of a man still in command of his house and his marriage. "Melania and I are great," he insisted one morning in front of Marine One. "These Democrats are desperate. They can't beat us on the economy, so they attack my wife. It's disgusting." But the way he said it, tight-lipped, with his eyes scanning the cameras, didn't convince anyone who wasn't already convinced. Still, there were defenders. Loyalists like Representative Blaine Rohr from Missouri claimed Crockett was weaponizing marriage. "You don't bring someone's family into the floor of Congress," he said on Newspoint Radio. "It's dirty politics, plain and simple." But Crockett never named Melania to hurt her. That was the difference. She pointed to a pattern, not a person. And the public could feel that. One op-ed in the Cincinnati Star wrote it best, "Crockett didn't drag Melania's name through the mud. She asked why the country never questions the mud around her." In quiet corners of Washington, some GOP aides started whispering about 2028, not Trump's re-election, but Crockett's future. Could she run statewide? Could she go national? A cable host even floated the idea live, "This woman's not going away. Whether you love her or hate her, she's created a moment." And moments like this, they change careers. Still, Crockett stayed quiet, intentional, strategic. She let the media do the talking while she went back to committee work, showed up at neighborhood events in D.C., and refused to gloat. Because this wasn't just a viral moment. It was a fracture. And fractures don't get glued back overnight. But pressure kept building from both sides, and someone was about to crack under it. Inside a sleek brownstone just off DuPont Circle, 5 Republican strategists huddled around a speakerphone on a Saturday morning. Coffee cups, notepads, and tired expressions covered the table. The mood wasn't aggressive, it was rattled. "Let me be blunt," said a voice from a donor group out of Cincinnati. "We're bleeding support in every district where women over 40 are a factor." No one disagreed. The poll numbers were already confirming it. In districts like Sarasota, Mesa, and Columbus suburbs, women who'd once leaned Republican were now clicking on Crockett's interview clips, sharing them in group chats, and, worse, talking about how much sense she made. She didn't say Melania was weak, a woman named Jan told a local Ohio paper. She said Melania had a backup plan. "I've had one, too. It's called being smart." That kind of shift wasn't something the GOP machine was used to. It wasn't loud. It wasn't radical. It was subtle, and it was cutting deep. Back at the brownstone, another strategist rubbed his temples. "We've gone through 5 different messaging drafts, and not one is sticking. People don't care about policy right now. They care about optics." That was the real nightmare, because the GOP, for all its bluster, had built a campaign season around control, family, strength, unity. But Jasmine Crockett had pushed a thumb through that image like it was thin paper. And worse, she did it without yelling, without lying, without looking afraid. Meanwhile, Trump's senior advisors were losing patience. Late Sunday evening, inside a private suite at Trump National in Bedminster, an impromptu war room was convened. Campaign manager Nolan Dre, 2 legal advisors, and Trump's communications director met with the president. No media, no notes. The message was simple: we have to address the prenup now. But Trump wasn't having it. You want me to give her what she wants? He growled, slamming his hand against the armrest. She's a low-level congresswoman. We elevate her, she wins. We say nothing. We still control the narrative. But they didn't. By then, Crockett's words had traveled so far and so fast that controlling the narrative was no longer an option. It was a fantasy. And the more Trump fought it, the more it looked like he was hiding something. That same day, Fox News released a flash poll conducted in key battleground states. One of the questions stood out: do you believe Melania Trump is fully supportive of her husband's campaign? Yes, 31%. No, 49%. Undecided, 20%. Those numbers sent tremors through the fundraising teams. Major donors started calling, not to pull support, not yet, but to question the plan. A well-known energy executive from Tulsa asked, if we're losing ground to one soundbite from a freshman congresswoman, what happens if she keeps going? In response, GOP leadership moved to close ranks. They deployed talking points to local affiliates: unfounded claims, privacy invasion, another leftist smear campaign. But none of it landed. The public wasn't reacting like it normally did, because the people watching didn't think Crockett had gone too far. They thought she had gone where no one else dared. Inside the Trump campaign, things got uglier. Leaks started to flow. One staffer told a reporter at the Press Ledger that morale was low, especially among younger campaign workers. People don't like defending what they can't explain, they said. Melania's silence isn't dignified anymore. It's suspicious. Then came the biggest hit, a story out of Palm Beach. A local journalist, someone who'd previously covered society galas and real estate launches, dropped a bombshell report that Melania had been seen meeting with a real estate lawyer 3 weeks before the Crockett hearing. The meeting lasted over 2 hours. The location? A quiet office near Worth Avenue. No security, no PR team. The story didn't confirm anything, but it didn't have to. Cable news hosts ran with it. Pundits filled in the blanks. And Crockett? She said nothing. She didn't need to. Back at her D.C. office, she scanned the headlines quietly, eyes sharp. Kia leaned over her shoulder. They're falling apart. Crockett just sipped her tea. Not yet, she said. But they're close. But when people are backed into a corner, that's when they start doing things they can't undo. It hit like a punch to the gut, quiet, fast, and undeniable. On a cool Thursday morning, the Florida Herald dropped an exclusive report. Tucked between stories about real estate in hurricane season was a headline that flipped the entire scandal upside down: leaked email suggests Melania's legal team prepared for separation prior to campaign launch. There was no mistaking it, a legitimate, verifiable email between a senior member of Melania Trump's legal team and an estate planning firm in Coral Gables. The date? 3.5 months before Trump stood on stage in Milwaukee and declared he was running again. The email mentioned emergency asset restructuring, discrete property holdings, and, most strikingly, ensuring financial independence in light of potential reputational risk. That phrase, reputational risk, was repeated across every screen in America by noon. It was no longer a matter of speculation. This wasn't body language analysis or gossip from former staffers. This was paper, time-stamped, lawyer-to-lawyer communication. And it confirmed what Crockett had hinted at from the beginning. In her office, Crockett read the article twice quietly. Kia burst in, holding a printed copy. It's real. It's finally real. Crockett didn't smile. She didn't jump. She just whispered, now they have to respond. And they did, but not how anyone expected. Hours after the report went public, the White House press secretary stood at the podium for a scheduled briefing. The room was packed wall to wall. Everyone was bracing for a statement from the First Lady. What they got was a deflection. "I'm not here to comment on private legal matters," the secretary said, adjusting her mic. The First Lady remains focused on her initiatives and her family. That was it. No denial, no correction, just a calm refusal to address the most explosive headline of the year. But the press wasn't having it. Follow-up questions rained down. Is the marriage stable? Was the prenup renegotiated as a result of legal exposure? Why has the First Lady remained out of public view for 10 days straight? The briefing ended early. Back inside Trump's campaign headquarters in Arlington, aides were in full panic mode. They knew silence wasn't going to work anymore, but they also knew the alternative was worse. If Melania stepped out now, whatever she said would be dissected frame by frame. So Trump did what he always did when cornered. He lashed out. That night, during a campaign rally in Fort Wayne, Indiana, he went off script. "You've got these low-energy Democrats like Jasmine Crockett trying to drag my family through the mud because they can't run on their record," he snapped. "They can't win on policy, so they come after my wife, a great woman, smarter than all of them combined." But the crowd didn't cheer as loud as usual. The energy was there, but it was cautious, different. One rally-goer, interviewed by a local station afterward, put it plainly, "I'm still voting for him, but I don't know what's going on with Melania. It feels off." The narrative was shifting. What began as a bold claim in a tense hearing had grown into something larger than politics. It had become believable. The American public, once skeptical, now felt like they'd been let in on something they weren't supposed to see, and they weren't going to unsee it. Crockett, meanwhile, chose that night to release a short handwritten statement, 12 words. When power hides behind silence, truth speaks louder than the shouting. No interviews, no press tour, just one simple message posted across her socials in the same font and tone as her original campaign flyers. It hit like a match in dry grass. Within an hour, the post had 200,000 shares. And then came the editorials. Opinion columns in Texas, Pennsylvania, even Florida described Crockett not as an agitator, but as a mirror, someone who had reflected back to the country what it refused to say out loud. But the pressure was growing in places Crockett couldn't control either. Other Democrats began asking questions. Some worried this might become a distraction from the legislative agenda. One senator privately told a reporter, "She kicked the hornet's nest. Now we all might get stung." But Crockett didn't flinch, because she hadn't revealed anything untrue. She hadn't doctored a file or made a personal attack. She held up documents. She asked questions, and the truth did the rest. But what she didn't know was that someone very close to the Trumps was about to make a move, one that would change everything. It was a Sunday evening when it finally happened. After nearly 2 weeks of silence, Melania Trump made a public appearance alone. She arrived at a children's hospital in Orlando, walking past the cameras with a frozen smile, her hand clutching a white folder that looked deliberately ordinary. She wore a dark blue dress, modest but not stiff, with simple pearls and no visible security detail in frame. Reporters were kept at a distance. No questions were allowed. But the real news wasn't the appearance itself. It was what came after. Just an hour later, a brief 2-paragraph statement was posted to her official page on the White House site. "As First Lady, I remain committed to my work, my son, and my privacy. I will not entertain public speculation about personal matters. Those who seek to exploit my family for political gain show themselves. I will not." It was elegant, measured, unapologetic, but it wasn't a denial, and the public noticed. Within minutes, commentators across all networks chimed in. Some called it dignified, others said it was proof she was distancing herself. Body language experts dissected her posture from the Orlando visit. Lip readers tried to analyze a moment she spoke quietly to a staffer off camera. But no matter how you looked at it, the message was clear: Melania wasn't coming to Donald's defense. Trump, still at his golf club in Bedminster, reportedly exploded when he saw the statement. "She's feeding the damn story," he shouted, according to one staffer who spoke to the Dispatch. "She thinks being quiet makes her look noble. It makes me look weak." That word, weak, was everything he feared. Within the next 48 hours, 2 major Republican donors quietly suspended their pledged contributions. A third redirected funds toward down-ballot races, saying the presidential campaign had become too unpredictable. Polls reflected the shift. In suburban counties across Michigan and Wisconsin, Trump's numbers dipped below 40% for the first time in months. Among independent women, Crockett's favorability doubled, and she had barely said a word since the hearing. In a quiet corner of the House cafeteria, she sat with Kia, scrolling through her phone between bites of lentil soup. "Look at this," Kia said, showing her a photo of a mural in Kansas City, Crockett's face painted alongside bold letters that read, "Tell the truth anyway." Crockett didn't smile. She just sighed. All this attention, and you know what matters most? That people finally feel seen. Across the country, people who had never followed congressional hearings were now talking about prenups, legal independence, and quiet power. Crockett had opened a door, and millions had stepped through it. She started getting invitations to speak at law schools, women's leadership events, civil rights roundtables. Her inbox filled with letters from people who never trusted politicians but somehow trusted her. And then came the late-night clip. During an appearance on The View, one of the hosts said, "Whatever you think of her politics, Jasmine Crockett didn't just poke the bear. She showed us the bear was made of glass." The room erupted in applause. It wasn't just the revelation. It was the courage. Even Democrats who were cautious at first began to shift. A few House colleagues who had kept their distance now reached out to express quiet support. One sent her a text that read, "That wasn't politics. That was bravery." But not everyone was on her side. A formal ethics complaint was filed, thin, politically motivated, and unlikely to go anywhere. Still, it served as a warning. The machine wasn't done trying to punish her. One night, walking out of the Capitol under the low pink sky, she turned to Kia and said, "They're going to come harder now. Every day, every speech, every document I touch." Kia didn't hesitate. "You ready for that?" Crockett looked ahead. "I've been ready. What I'm not ready for is going back to a world where people pretend this kind of silence is normal. Because that's what this had always been about, not about prenups or power couples. It was about what we accept, what we protect, and who we believe, even when the truth is right in front of us." Jasmine Crockett never raised her voice. She didn't call names. She simply lit a match. And the rest? The country watched it burn. If this story made you think, even just a little, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. And subscribe for more stories that speak the truth others are too afraid to touch.